Right, members, the sitting is resumed and it's time for questions to the Minister of Finance. Tá sé nám dúine questioní don Aragidesh. Agus írim Sir Daniel McCrossan. I call Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Speaker, question 1, please, Minister.
Írim Sir Naira on Freigerha. Call the Minister.
My department is committed to creating more jobs for young people in the civil service. To enable younger people and other unrepresented groups to apply for posts, Next HR in my department has led a high-volume open recruitment exercises rather than internal promotion exercises that confined applications to existing civil servants in the grade below the vacancy, which were previously the norm. I recently launched a number of external recruitment campaigns, including one for more than 500 executive officer posts. These campaigns specifically target young people using social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram and Snapchat, and advertising on digital platforms such as Spotify and DAX, and on radio stations known to appeal to younger markets. Later this month, I will be launching a student placement scheme which will give over 100 students the opportunity to work across a range of areas in the civil service, as well as giving the students an opportunity to develop their skills and experience. It will encourage them to consider the civil service as a potential career path in the future. In addition, work to expand the number of civil service apprenticeships is also ongoing, with 2 apprentice recruitment exercises for procurement and civil engineering now live. Further civil service apprenticeships are under development. We are also developing a new management trainee scheme aimed at graduates.
Daniel McCrossan, supplementary for Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Minister, for the answer to that question. Minister, people in my constituency of West Rome want to know about the Connect 2 regional hub in Omagh. Can you, Minister, confirm if it will be open indeed in 2022? And can you also guarantee that there will be high-value jobs for people in the area? And will the Minister also add if there is any consideration given to such a hub for the Strabane area?
Well, there is a scheduled engagement, and as he correctly identifies, Omagh was directed as one of the 10 areas being looked at first, and that was based on a number of factors, an assessment of where people were travelling into headquarters in Belfast from, an assessment of where workers were actually coming from to locate these areas. So they are all moving at different speeds. Downpatrick, I suspect, will be the first one on board, and after that then they will roll out. I'll be very happy to get them the estimated time frame for Omagh. Can I say in terms of relating it to the first question, these are jobs so that people who can apply, who perhaps traditionally didn't apply for constituents such as his own and my own on border areas, where the prospect of driving 5 days a week into Belfast was off-putting for people. This gives people the opportunity to work a number of days from a regional hub, and therefore I think makes that a prospect of that type of career more attractive for people. So they will be at whatever value the people who get the jobs in the area. What we're providing for is the base to allow them to have a more flexible working approach, and I do think in time that will change and continue to change the make-up of the civil service, both in terms particularly for women who would struggle with that amount of time travelling in and out, given the burden of responsibility in the home often falls to them, unfortunately, but also for younger people and for people from more peripheral areas who traditionally wouldn't have been seen in the civil service.
I call Steve Aiken.
The Minister for his reply so far. One of the things that the previous Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance said before she left was the lack of a fast stream for bringing in high-quality graduates into the Northern Ireland Civil Service to change that. And in fact, we haven't had a fast stream programme, I think, now for nearly a decade. Would the Minister say where he's considering introducing a fast stream? And if not, why not? Well,
there is a report, as he will know, the Audit Office report in relation to capability and capacity within the civil service, and one of the suggested responses to that would be the idea of a fast stream to make sure that you get the right people in the right place at the right time. And I think there's clearly a need for a civil service to be much more agile, to be much more flexible, to be much more representative of the community we all collectively represent and it works for. And so I'm open to any of those ideas. I know it's something that the previous Permanent Secretary was keen on. We are in the process of developing a reform process for the civil service, acting on the back of a number of reports, including that Audit Office report. And I think those objectives are ones that we will want to have to the fore when we're developing new ideas and new ways of dealing with civil service in the time ahead.
Éireann Sir Nicola Brogan fáinne ceist I call Nicola Brogan.
Good last Corla, and I thank the Minister for his answer so far, and I welcome that information about the regional hubs in Omagh. It will be very welcome to people in Omagh and across West Tyrone. Can I also ask the Minister to outline what steps he is taking to ensure that job opportunities are job opportunities for those furthest from the labour market, please?
Well, the Civil Service as an employer is supporting the Department of Community's recently launched Job Start scheme, and that's open to all employers and provides paid work placements opportunities for 6 to 9 months for young people aged 16 to 24 who are at risk of long-term unemployment. The next HR in my own department is supporting the Department of Communities as they pilot the scheme with a specific focus on people aged 16 to 24 with disabilities in preparation to rolling it out across the Civil Service in due course. So, as well as offering opportunities across departments to young people with disabilities, to propose to broaden the scheme to include other young people at risk of long-term unemployment, such as those leaving the care system. The expansion of a number of apprenticeship schemes in the Civil Service will also be important in supporting those furthest from the job market and providing an entry route into the Civil Service. My own department is committed to expanding the number of apprenticeship schemes within the Civil Service to provide an alternative career entry routes into the Civil Service and help ensure it is reflective of the society it serves.
I call Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister has referred to the Northern Ireland Audit Office Capacity and Capability Report, which obviously was recently considered by the Public Accounts Committee. Within that, it also highlights we've got an older workforce within the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Is the Minister satisfied all actions are being taken for succession planning and for recruitment for those vacancies, so we have a civil service which has the right skills and capacity to go forward?
Well, I think the report has highlighted a number of areas, and that could well be considered to be one of them. There is a retirement policy currently at the Civil Service which allows people to partially retire but to stay and work for potentially an open-ended number of years in that post. And I've asked people to look at how that is being implemented. There are legal rights to avail of early retirement, but the question of whether that fits in with the work scheme in departments is something that I think line managers and permanent secretaries need to look at again. I've asked for some advice in relation to that. So there is a big improvement exercise there. I mean, let's not forget the Civil Service have done remarkable work, and particularly over the last year across a whole range of departments. But there is identified a need for, as you say, getting the right skills, the right balance, the right age profile into the Civil Service, and that's a very significant undertaking, but it's one that we are prepared and indeed keen to embrace in the time ahead. And as the department with responsibility overall for the Civil Service, we will be wanting other departments to come along that route with us.
I call Jim Allister.
The Civil Service has been without a permanent head now for almost a year, and now we have a proposition of a twin-headed approach. Does the Minister think that the absence of a head of the Civil Service has diminished the lack of strategic direction and leadership in the Civil Service? And will the twin-headed approach worsen that or improve it?
Well, I don't think so. To be quite honest, regardless of what strategic direction and approach was being developed within the Executive or indeed across the Civil Service, we were all in response mode this year. So the priority was responding to the pandemic, getting support to people that needed, getting support to the health service. So it was very much focused on the day-to-day over the last year, 15 months. It isn't a twin-head role that's been developed. It is someone to head up TEO as a distinct department, so that the head of the Civil Service can have that more strategic approach across the entire range of all of the departments and all the civil servants in the public sector and the arm's length bodies. So I think in many ways it allows that more strategic approach rather than day-to-day management of the Executive Office, and that's been passed down to a newly created permanent secretary post. So I think, in my own perspective on it, I think it will be helpful in terms of what he is suggesting is required. And I'll go back to the debate this morning, and I'm sure we'll continue that afternoon, in terms of getting us into a strategic approach, multi-annual budget programme for government outcome. I think that's the type of work I would want the head of the Civil Service to be focusing on, rather than day-to-day management of the Executive Office.
I call Pam Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Question number 2, please.
Last Concorda, with your permission, I'll answer question 2 and question 12 together. Multi-year budgets are essential to help plan services not just in health but right across the public sector. The Health Minister and I have both called on the British Government to provide the Executive with a multi-year budget. I raised this with Chancellor Rishi Sunak when I was in London last month, and he indicated his intention to announce a multi-year spending review later this year. On this basis, the Executive will shortly begin preparations for its multi-year draft budget. Budgets are agreed by all ministers, not just the Finance Minister. However, I will be arguing for priority to continue to be given to health, both to assist with the immediate waiting crisis and to fund longer-term transformation.
Supplementary for Pam Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. Does the Minister agree that health will need a high priority in terms of budgetary allocations in future to properly address the horrendous waiting lists and to deliver the health transformation that's so badly needed, which may mean tightening of the purse strings for less important political projects?
Well, I think I think the Executive has agreed and has agreed for some time now, right back to previous Executives and the adoption of the Bengal report, that we would try and take the politics out of health, that we would have a collective approach across the Executive. So in that sense, it didn't matter who the Health Minister was. It was a collective Executive approach. And we have endeavoured to continue that through very, very challenging times. And you will see the Health has received over half of the revenue budget available to us. Of course, in a standstill rollover budget situation, that's not what health needs. Health needs quite a lot more just to stand still itself. But we have then been able to supplement that with COVID spending. And we are having a discussion, the Executive, in the not too distant future in relation to the waiting lists themselves, to see is there further work we can do in year to try and bring focus and support on what's needed. Now, I have given the Health Minister an additional, I think it's £250 million of COVID money this year for rebuilding the health service coming out of the pandemic, of which I think £40 million of that has been allocated by the Health Department to waiting lists. So I'm hopeful that that obviously will help, but what we know in the longer term transformation process, what health needs is recurrent funding which is guaranteed into the future over a multi-year budget scenario, and that's the place that we all want to get to.
Colin McGilligan for Honeycast.
The Minister for the answer. Minister, does this year's budget provide the Health Department with funding to allow it to progress much needed transformation?
The Executive has prioritised the Department of Health and receives, as I said, almost 50% of the budget. We met all the COVID-19 bids and we set aside funding at the budget pending a health assessment, and we subsequently allocated further funding in the recent May exercise. So allocation provides some £6.4 billion to the Department of Health, including £380 million for COVID, and that's broken down as £25 million for the COVID-19 vaccine deployment, £105 million for ongoing operational response, and £250 million for rebuilding. As I said, £40 million of that Health has decided to use for waiting lists. So I think we're all in agreement that what health needs, and I think that's the point of the question, is an ability to plan over a number of years, to have certainty in terms of the resource, to have recurrent funding, to employ the people that it needs to see that transformation through in the health system. But the Executive is committed to that, and we only hope that the arguments that we're making with the Prime Minister during a recent meeting that the Deputy First Minister attended, and with the Chancellor about the British Government resourcing the rebuilding of the health service coming out of the pandemic is one which bears fruit for us.
Matthew O'Toole for Honeycast.
Thank you.
Matthew O'Toole for a question.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, we might not get the Treasury multi-year spending review until close to the end of the year. If we're then waiting on a process for a multi-annual budget in the springtime, that will, with the best will in the world, be caught up in our political cycle here, and there will be an election. Would it be better for all the parties here, led by you as Finance Minister and the Health Minister, to agree on what was needed before the spending review and then bring it back to the Assembly immediately afterwards, and then other departments can be filled in afterwards?
Well, I'm arguing I've spoken to the budget team in our department, and only just this week, to kick-start the discussion as to how we plan and prepare for a multi-year budget. And I think we have to begin that preparation. I'm hopeful that the Executive can do that over the summer, beginning in early summer, to start to look at the priorities in time ahead. We won't know what the funding envelope is, as he correctly says, and we hope that will be earlier in the autumn, but last year it didn't come to the 25th of November. But nonetheless, I think the Executive do have to prioritise. And I think that is probably a more useful exercise in the scenario where we are running to the end of the mandate and no party or minister knows whether they'll be back, or indeed whether what party may hold any certain portfolio in the executive. So I think it's much more of a blank sheet approach to actually agreeing priorities across the 5 parties that make up the executive and trying to set a course ahead, which hopefully we then get the budget as part of that comprehensive spending review announcement to match our ambition in that regard.
Steve Aiken for a question.
Indeed. Thank you very much, indeed, Mayor. I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Minister, bearing in mind that from what you've said from this and looking at multi-year budgets and the rest of it, can we now say that the threat of top slicing of the Department of Health's budget is no longer on the table?
Well, as the member knows, I had said that if we were to end up in a scenario where we were paying out the entirety of the victims' payments, and we're still in discussion and dispute with Treasury in relation to that, that one scenario in that if we had to meet all of those costs was to take it from across all departments. That's one way of doing that. We have created the headroom for sufficient funds for this year to cover that cost from the executive. But of course he will understand that the executive are in agreement that it is not our responsibility to cover that cost. Now, there is a discussion which has been prompted in recent times about the immediate action in relation to waiting lists, and that may well result. I noticed one minister had offered to reduce her own budget in accordance to meet any challenges with the waiting list. So if the executive decided to go that approach, not that that would be taking money from health, it would be putting money to health. But what health needs is recurrent funding. They need not just money in this year's budget, they need money going forward to recruit people to tackle the waiting lists and the broader transformation issue.
I call Paula Bradshaw.
Speaker. Minister, one of the reasons why we have such horrendous waiting lists here in Northern Ireland is due to the vacancies, and if we were paying our health and social care staff better, I don't think we would have such a big problem. You'll be aware of Unison's campaign for all health and social care staff to receive an immediate £2,000 per year pay increase, and obviously that would need to come from the UK Treasury. I'm just wondering what conversations you've had with them around that. Thank you.
Well, we have had broad conversations about supporting providing the necessary support to rebuild health, and if the Prime Minister is hosting and he has been discussions across different devolved areas about what needs to be done in the time ahead. I know the Deputy First Minister firmly put that on the agenda with him, that it is about rebuilding the health service, because if a lesson was needed, and for those of us who complained about those ongoing cuts and cuts and cuts, which saw people leaving their jobs, being asked to work longer hours for less pay, and inevitably that led to people leaving the service, or people not wishing to join, and a difficulty in recruiting, then I think we need to get that sufficient resource into rebuilding, and that will include the issue of wages and fair working hours for health staff.
I call Alan Chambers for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question 3.
In December 2016, the Executive agreed to the commencement of the review of the financial process to simplify financial reporting and to better align budgets, estimates and accounts. Since that time, a project team within my department has been working with colleagues across all other departments to implement that review. While it was initially planned that the changes would be implemented in 2021, this was unfortunately delayed, firstly due to the lack of a working assembly and so an inability to progress legislation, and subsequently by the coronavirus pandemic. Implementation is now planned for 2022-23. Legislation is currently in progress to help enable this implementation. The Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill is introduced in the Assembly on the 1st of June.
Mr. Chambers for a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. Can the Minister tell me, in his conversations with the Independent Fiscal Council, what recommendations they have made on reporting standards, and will he also commit to following OECD standards? Thank you.
Well, the Fiscal Council is not long in place, and they are engaged in an exercise now in terms of consultation, discussion with various interested parties, and they'll soon be with the committee this week. I think the Finance Committee this week. So they haven't as yet made recommendations to me in relation to the outcome of that, and I also expect them to consider enhancing further the terms of reference. We give them essentially a start-up terms of reference and allow them as an independent body to examine the scope of what they want to deal with. So I would expect that reporting and a range of other matters in terms of sustainability of our finances and analysis of all of that is something that they will turn their attention to, but I'm not being prescriptive. If they have their independence and if they have engaged in a consultation exercise, I will expect them to come back to us to tell us what they intend to do and what recommendations they will intend to make in the longer term.
Melissa McHugh, for your case, I call Melissa McHugh.
Gramagat las Concarlo agus Bihas, Ira Foster, Fahine the Ratches. Minister, just staying with the Fiscal Council, an issue which I alluded to in the debate prior to lunchtime, and what way do you think that the Fiscal Council in itself will improve financial reporting?
Well, the Council, as I say, it's yet to fully confirm its own terms of reference and how it will work, but our intent in terms of establishment has been to assist, obviously, in scrutinising processes and decisions involved in the executive management of the budget, and that would mean they would be interested in the review of the financial process, how that will work, and how that will assist in changing the reporting to the Assembly and to the wider public, and that's a discussion we've had not just this morning but at many times over budget debates here. As you know, the Fiscal Council is an independent body, and it's there not for me to say how it may approach this task or how involved they may be in the oversight of this work, but I do want to say I welcome anything which brings transparency to the financial processes.
Mayor Pat Catney, for your case, I call Pat Catney.
Thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. Minister, there's 500 million in the 21-22 allocated funding for COVID funding. What guarantees do you have that the money can be and will be reallocated?
Well, I mean, what we've done with the COVID money is we made an initial allocation to health. We waited on health actually to bring forward their assessment for the year before we allocated some of the rest of it, because they had first shout in relation to what their needs were. And once we got that, we then were able to meet the bids from other departments. So departments make bids for this money on the basis that they can spend. And we will monitor that as the year goes on. If it's not been spent for the intention that it was, it will have to be resurrendered and then redistributed at a later stage in the year. But I think we proved last year with a much more significant amount of COVID funding that the department, it's our department itself and all of the other departments were able to spend out that money about before the end of the financial year. Something I think that there was quite a degree of scepticism around this chamber, maybe in January or February, that would be achieved, but nonetheless it was. So I don't anticipate that money not being spent in some useful fashion in order to assist us in our COVID response.
Call Paula Bradshaw for a question.
Number 4, please.
A civil service-wide survey has indicated that the respondents in most departments have made financial savings as a result of working from home, for example as a result of reductions in travel costs. Nevertheless, employees who incur additional costs may be reimbursed by the civil service for costs incurred in the making of business calls on a personal mobile phone or home landline, additional home broadband costs, whether it's installation or increased data charges required solely for work purposes, desk costs up to £100, IT equipment and chairs already provided by the civil service. The staff that have incurred additional costs can also claim tax relief in line with HMRC rules. HMRC publishes guidance on how to claim tax relief on any home working expenses incurred that are not reimbursed by the employer. In October 2020, they set up a new dedicated working from home microservice, recognising that the tax years 2021 and 21-22 are different and making claiming the tax relief quick and easy.
Paula Bradshaw for a supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for your response. I had been contacted about this, so I'm conscious that maybe the communication around this maybe isn't as clear as you would like in the department. But just to echo what you'd said there earlier, that many of them have been working so hard during the pandemic, and I'm just wondering, is there any special recognition scheme that you're going to introduce for the civil servants? Thank you.
Well, the Executive did agree to support a recognition scheme of £500 payment for healthcare staff, and we have endeavoured in terms of our pay awards for civil servants not to follow the model that was adopted in London, where they went for a a 1% pay increase for healthcare staff and a freeze for all other public servants. So we have brought forward an increase over 2 years for civil service. Now, of course, we are on a very fixed budget, and that's very challenging across all other departments. We have to balance what we could give in terms of pay increase with what was affordable across the departments and other demands on public services. So we are keen to support where we can our public service. We do recognise the efforts that have been made, in particular over the last year. We have provided an enormous amount of support in terms of IT support to people. And the general feedback in terms of that blend of working from home and coming in has been very, very positive. And sickness levels have dropped and productivity has gone up, but we want to ensure that people do have a good working experience and feel well supported, both financially and in terms of whatever other measures we can. And if there is a communication issue in relation to that, I'm very happy to raise that with the department and make sure that's looked at.
Iram Sir Gemma Dolan, Fáinne I call Gemma Dolan.
And I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Minister, can you just clarify where employees have incurred extra costs, can find out more about what support is available to them?
Yes, as I said to the previous questioner, if that is an issue, I'm certainly happy. But the guidance in relation to homework and expenses for civil service staff is available on the COVID-19 hub on the Finance Department's website. And so I would suggest that people go there in the first instance. But if we are finding that there is some breakdown in that communication, I'm happy to have that looked at to make sure that people do understand what they would be entitled to.
Sinead McLaughlin, Fáinne I call Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer so far. And we do know that this blended and flexible working is particularly welcome for those that have young families or caring responsibilities. Can I ask the Minister what he is doing to close that gender gap among the civil servants?
Well, I appreciate the member might not have been in earlier, but we did have a fairly lengthy discussion in the first question about reform to civil service, about attracting new people, about making the working experience such that it does, throughout the Connect hubs that we're talking about, where people who live in peripheral areas such as Derry and in the border areas, who would otherwise would not have been attracted to go on 5 days a week to work from a headquarters in Belfast, and that particularly, I think, is a disincentive for women who bear the burden, unfortunately, of managing family life. That it can become more attractive if we present those different options. So I think we are very conscious that there are a number of steps which have told us that the civil service, while it has been working and performed heroically over the last year, certainly, that there is need for substantial change and a greater diversity in terms of gender, in terms of age profile and disability, ethnic minorities. There certainly is much room for improvement, and we have a range of measures which we hope to bring forward to try and achieve that.
I call Andrew Muir for question.
Question 5, Mr Deputy Speaker.
A report by Deloitte in 2007 estimated the cost of division at £1.5 billion. In 2016, the University of Ulster Economic Policy Centre estimated the cost of division at a lower figure, between £403 million and £833 million. The report outlined that the significant complexity in the cost of delivering services in the North, costs that cannot solely be attributed in the context of a divided society. For example, delivering services in such a small region means we don't benefit from economies of scale. The report also found that while on average the cost of public service provision tends to be higher than in Britain, across most areas the costs here typically fall within the range of costs identified in other regions. The one exception to this is the cost of policing.
Muir for a supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for his response. As the Minister is aware, during a multitude of budget debates, it is often mentioned the need to provide much more finance to deal with our waiting list crisis and for other services, also the need to consider revenue raising. Does the Minister not agree that none of those arguments carry any weight or credibility until we are prepared to look at our own finances and tackle the cost of division in Northern Ireland?
Well, as I said, it isn't a straightforward issue. There is a complexity in that, and attributing what is actually cost of division. And of course, one of the ways that we can, I think, deal with it is to deal with the division itself, is to try and cut down and reduce down the divisions in society, to reduce the policing costs associated with that, which is significantly higher here than in other areas, and to try and encourage that reconciliation process that is necessary. So it is, I would say, an ambition to try and reduce that, but it's an ambition for society, not just for the public purse, albeit it has that knock-on effect into the public purse. And we will obviously strive to do that as best we can. The Executive Office lead on some of these reconciliation measures, and we have been challenged this year in terms of providing the level of support that they have wanted to go into those programmes and projects. But nonetheless, I think it's incumbent on all of us to try and heal division in society and promote reconciliation, and thereby reduce the cost that it takes to sustain division.
That ends the period for listed questions. We will now move to 15 minutes of topical questions. Agus Iram Sir Jerry Carroll from Newcastle. I call Jerry Carroll.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Minister, can you give any update on any plans to review, change or amend procurement legislation to include human rights clauses?
Well, we're looking at a range of measures, as he will know, probably from listening to me in previous appearances in the Chamber. We did reconstitute the Procurement Board. We brought on practitioners, including people from the social enterprise sector as well. We have been engaged with the community and voluntary sector. There is a sector within my department which look at ethical procurement, and we will be seeking advice from them. And one of the early objectives we've set ourselves, and actually the Procurement Board will meet tomorrow to consider a paper on this, is around social value. And social value isn't just about that job creation, it is about environmental impact, it's about ethical procurement, it's about human rights in the supply chain. And the further you get from where we are, the more difficult some of those things are to measure in terms of companies who supply companies, and eventually ends up with us. But nonetheless, there is an attempt to strive and to improve, not just in what we do in terms of value for money, that's important, but also we have responsibility as an organisation that spends £3 billion a year to make sure that when we're procuring, we're doing so in a way which does support human rights and does support ethical procurement, environmental objectives and social value objectives.
Jerry Carroll, supplementary question for Jerry Carroll.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Would he agree with me that it's not only immoral for the Executive and departments to take contracts or services from states with terrible human rights records and breaches, but he will work to end that practice by changing the legislation? Is that type of area included in the social value method that he talked about?
We will look to legislation to underpin social value. We are trying to get the procurement policy right in the first instance, and get the part of the change that we made in terms of the Procurement Board was to make the adoption of policy an executive adoption, so that gives it an imprimatur right across all departments. But certainly I know from our own department's objectives, we want to be advising other departments on ethical procurement. As I say, the further you get down the supply chain across the world, sometimes the more difficult it is to get accurate information, but that shouldn't stop us trying. And where we have a sense that either companies themselves or countries are involved in anti-human rights or unethical behaviour, then I think we should be considering that very strongly in terms of our willingness to spend money on their products.
I call Roy Beggs for a question.
During the past year, there's been new working practice, people working from home. So my question to the Minister is, what assessment has there been of the effectiveness of civil servants when working from home, and the corresponding reduction in office requirements where there's potential for savings?
Well, I think the member hits on what was a developing question, but like a lot of other things, the pandemic has accelerated that on somewhat, because what became, if you like, a growing practice then became a necessity for a period of time, and that obviously has given us an opportunity. There has been, as I referred to in a previous question, an assessment of the civil services survey carried out in terms of people on their working from home experience, the costs associated. It has been a very positive response. People have enjoyed that ability to work from home. I can't speak for all departments, but there is a broad sense that sickness levels have gone down and productivity has certainly gone up in certain areas, and we are looking to what is called a more blended model of people working, a mixture of working from home, availability of those connect hubs around the north that I have talked about at previous times, and so we can have a different, that will have the effect of reducing travel time but also reducing the carbon footprint. In terms of the civil service estate, then we have to consider the knock-on effect of that. That doesn't mean wholesale shutting up of offices in Belfast. But I think it does allow us to consider how we rationalise the estate, and the cost of the estate for each department is a very significant cost, and I would hope there would be savings in the longer term in relation to that. So I think this is an exercise that we are well into now. We need to assess the impact on the estate. We need to make that assessment going forward in terms of what the office requirements will be, and to try and minimise the cost so that that money can be used for public services instead.
Mr Biggs for a supplementary.
With that change in working practice, there has been a reduction in commuting levels and the pressures on our roads. So my question to the Minister is, will there be a review of all new roads development to ensure that it is justified by the actual traffic levels that are developing, and also enable perhaps additional money to be directed towards green infrastructure in our towns and cities to allow people to walk and cycle more often to their work?
Well, that would be a question, I suppose, for the Minister for Infrastructure, but I'm sure, as with he will know with any significant road building exercise, a business case is based on the volumes of traffic, and if that does reduce, and if that pattern is the same, I have to say, while traffic is not back up anywhere near the levels it was pre-pandemic, you certainly, as people like myself who commute in to here on a daily basis, do notice a significant increase in traffic over the last number of months. But I think the objective in changing the working arrangements is to try and reduce travel time, the carbon footprint. We, of course, should be encouraging more people onto public transport, and investment in that green infrastructure, he says, I think does point to a better way forward into the future.
I call Joanne Bunting for a question.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Minister what engagement his department has had with the Department of Communities to ensure that there is necessary funding available to progress the Subregional Stadia programme, please?
Well, we have discussed with the Department of Communities in relation to the budget process pre-Christmas, when we were waiting, and then post, when we set the initial draft budget, as to what the department's requirements were. Of course, in a standstill budget scenario, and particularly a department like Communities, which is a big department with a lot of staff and costs attached to it, then that in effect means a reduction. So while we have had some increase in our capital budget, and we did give some departments an increase in the capital budget, I'm sure not all got everything they had wanted or would like to have brought forward. The specifics of the sub-regional Stadia programme, I wouldn't have the figures as to what was bid for or what was received. It may be a matter for the question for the Department for the Communities themselves. But certainly there was an increased capital budget this time, and it's obviously up to the departments then when they receive that to prioritise it accordingly.
Joanne Bunting for a supplementary.
Thank you, sir. And could I just ask then, on the back of that, the Minister will be aware that local football clubs have now been waiting some 10 years to see the benefits of this programme. And given that sport plays a huge role in the general well-being of our whole society, does he agree that it's time to make vital capital investment into sport, and in so doing benefit the construction sector?
Yes, well, I'm all for, and that's why, with overall disappointment, I suppose, in terms of the budget allocation we got, there was some ray of hope in terms of the capital allocation was an improvement, and I'm all for putting that into sport. I'm a sports fan myself. I represented some of those clubs in the couple of years when the executive wasn't functioning and trying to get access to the sub-regional fund, and there was difficulty in distributing them because permanent secretaries were not prepared to take decisions they thought ministers should take. So I would love to see that out on the ground. I know the benefits that brings, not just in terms of construction jobs, but the much broader benefit to the community and to younger people in particular from access to and involvement in sport. So I'd be a keen supporter of all of that, and I hope that the department has sufficient to be able to invest all that it would want to invest in supporting sport in the time ahead.
Members in his place for the next question. Agus Nishiram Sir John O'Dowd for Newcast. I call John O'Dowd.
Thank you, Laskin Corley, and thank the Minister for his answers thus far. Minister, the grants provided to businesses over this last 15 months has been a lifeline not only to the businesses but to their employees in keeping roofs overhead and paying bills, etc. Though some of the schemes judge businesses regardless of the number of premises they had as a business with a single premise. Is there any way that the Executive or your department can offer further support to those businesses?
Well, we've had quite a number of engagements with what are known as the multiples and it has been very difficult. It's proved difficult in other jurisdictions as well, and different administrations have come up with different schemes to try and provide support for them. And it wasn't possible in the last scheme as we were rolling it out with the time frame involved because particularly at the lower level of premises, it's quite complex to differentiate them from other schemes. They don't all come under just the one banner. They're not all the same business franchise. They're kind of multiples within that again. So what we have done is we have asked LPS to go off and look at the possibility of doing a scheme later in the year, once we get clear of all of the schemes that LPS are currently running, to devise a scheme. We will be talking to the representatives from the multiples in the next week or so to advise them of what we intend to do, and I am hopeful that we will be able to devise a scheme which provides some level of support to them, because they are one of the groups that while they have got support for one business premise, obviously with own and arranged, and they haven't got support for the rest. So they are one of the groups in that sense that have been left out, and we're determined to try and do something if we can to support them.
Okay, Darlene Tachig, John O'Dowd. Supplementary question for John O'Dowd.
Thank you. That'll be very welcome news to those affected, and the £10,000 and £25,000 grants that have been announced and will hopefully be issued over this month to businesses who also missed out on some of the grants will also be very welcome. But there's another group, though, despite the economic downturn, there were still businesses opening up within this last year. Those businesses may not have been able to avail of any of those grants. Will there be support coming forward for those businesses?
Well, the people who are currently availing of the top-up grants, the 5,000 and the 10,000 grants, were people who were able to open, but it was a recognition that footfall had been down. So, the shops that operated dependent on office workers in the vicinity to, keep them ticking over, for instance. And so those grants were specifically for those people who didn't get LRS or the Department for Economy's similar scheme, that those £5,000 and £10,000 top-up grants are made available to them. Of course, all of the retail and hospitality sector and quite a lot of other sectors will enjoy another full year's rates holiday as well. And then we have the economic package which has been supported for the Department of the Economy, including the High Street voucher, which will hopefully have a stimulant effect in terms of people shopping in local retail in particular. So there are a range of measures, and we recognise that all of that will not, and never could replace lost earnings from people over the course of this pandemic. But what it is trying to use the finances we got, limited as they were, to try and target those as effective as we could, try and keep people alive in the time ahead so that they can get back to full trading and recover their businesses.
Sir Matthew Toole for Hunyakest. I call Matthew Toole for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can the Finance Minister indicate when he expects to update the House on the terms of reference of the Fiscal Commission?
Well, the Commission, like the Council, is out off doing some of its work at the moment, and I am sure he and others in the Finance Committee will be engaged in it in due course. As he acknowledged, I think, in one of his earlier contributions, there are some very experienced and able people involved in both the Council and the Commission. And what we wanted to be doing, particularly in relation to the Council, which is an ongoing remit in terms of reporting, but what we wanted to do in both of them was to give them the space to do their engagements, to establish their own independence, so that they weren't just becoming a tool of the department to do our bidding. And I think he'll know with the people that are involved in it that that will not be the case. So I look forward to them coming back to us with their initial findings. The time frame that we have given them in terms of providing a report is the end of the year. It will be for an incoming executive to act on, I would imagine, but I think it will inform a debate which brings us beyond, as he would see, the annual budget cycle and that into what the future holds and what opportunities there are for us in terms of raising our own revenue.
Case Darlene Tachig, Matthew O'Toole. Supplementary question for Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that when the Fiscal Commission formally respond to him, that their findings will be published and laid in the Assembly, i.e. there won't be a report that goes to the Executive and has to get on an Executive agenda, but that will be laid in public and debated here in the Assembly?
Well, my intention about creating a Fiscal Commission, and some people were not hugely warm to the idea of it, it's an exercise that both Scotland and Wales have gone through, and I think a debate and an informed discussion such as that is beneficial to us all. But my intention in relation to that was to assist in a public debate, and a debate in this Assembly, a debate outside this Assembly. So I would want, obviously, to make sure that any report that they produce is available to this Assembly and to the public, so we can have a proper and informed debate in the time ahead.
We have time for a brief question from Paula Bradley.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I ask you then, Minister, what discussions you've had, if any, with the Minister of Infrastructure in relation to rolling support for the taxi, bus and coach industry, just to counteract the ongoing challenges they're going through while we build up public confidence?
Well, the member will know that particularly in that there was some financial support offered up specifically for those projects, and there was quite a bit of wrangling between a couple of departments as to who had responsibility for all of this. And when eventually infrastructure stepped up to take that responsibility, there was finance made available. I think not all of it was used, certainly in relation to coaches. But we did insist at the end of the financial year we had additional COVID money, and we tried to get departments to come back in where they felt more money could be used to bid for more. But that wasn't the case from the Department for Infrastructure in relation to that. So I'm happy to discuss at any time if there's additional support required. We have allocated most of the COVID money that we have available to us. We're not expecting any more to be made available, unlike last year where we received updated tranches over the course of the year. But if any is not used and surrendered, or if more is made available to us, I'm very happy to look at any urgent schemes that a Minister might think important to tap into that.
That concludes topical questions. If members just take their ease while we change to the next item of business, that's the budget bill.